It begins with a photograph, the kind that smells faintly of mildew and coal dust, edges curled, faces fading into the yellow of time. In the image, a boy stands between two adults who could be his parents. But the way the man's hand rests on the child's shoulder feels wrong, not protective, possessive, and the woman, her eyes aren't looking at the camera, they're looking at him, the boy, her son, or her brother. The photograph was taken in Laurel County, Kentucky, in 1929. No one remembers who held the camera, but what happened in that farmhouse after the shutter clicked has haunted the town for nearly a century. Locals don't talk about it anymore, not because they forgot, but because memory itself began to rot there. They called him Eli Thomason, born on a night when thunder walked the hills like a preacher too drunk to find his way home. His birth certificate lists his mother as Clara Thomason, 23, unmarried. His father's name is left blank. In 1929, that was enough to curse a woman. But it wasn't the absence of a father that made the Thomason story infamous. It was the whisper that there might have been too many fathers, or none at all. Neighbors said Clara rarely left the house after Eli was born. Her older brother, Jacob, did the errands, bought supplies, fixed fences, told people his sister was delicate. But some nights, light could be seen flickering in the upstairs window, and voices soft, frantic, drifted into the fields. By autumn, the whispers began. They said Jacob had become more than a brother to Clara, that Eli's pale blue eyes matched his uncle's too precisely. No one wanted to believe it, but when Jacob disappeared in 1932, and Clara followed him into the grave a week later, the town sealed its mouth. Years passed, the farmhouse collapsed, the family line ended, but then, in 1974, when a storm unearthed the foundation, workers found something buried beneath the floorboards, a second birth certificate. Same date, same mother, same child, but this time a father's name had been added, Jacob Thomason. When the county archivist first saw the second certificate, he thought it was a forgery, a cruel joke by someone dredging up old gossip. But the paper was authentic, same registry ink, same handwriting as the original clerk from 1929. The only difference was the addition of one name, pressed into the page like a confession written by trembling hands. Jacob Thomason. The archivist, a man named Warren Dale, tried to trace the document's trail, but every line led to dead ends literally. The clerk who signed it had died in 1930. The county courthouse fire of '41 had taken most of the surrounding records. And yet the certificate survived, intact, preserved, like someone had hidden it deliberately. He said later that touching it felt wrong, like the paper was colder than it should have been. In 1975, the County Historical Society sent 2 men to the site of the old Thomason farm to catalog the ruins. What they found wasn't in their notes. Beneath the collapsed stairs, where the foundation stones were damp with decades of runoff, they uncovered a child's toy, a small wooden horse hand, carved initials E.T., etched into its flank, but beside it was something no one expected, a child's coffin. The box was crude, hastily built. Inside, fragments of bone small, fragile, belonging to a boy no older than 4. There was no grave marker, no ceremony, only the remnants of a wool blanket and something else, a lock of hair, tied with a ribbon the color of dried blood. DNA testing wasn't available then, but the discovery was enough to split the town open again. The elders started to talk, quietly at first. One man, old enough to remember the Depression, said he'd seen Jacob carrying a bundle one morning before sunrise, said he'd been weeping, said he'd heard a woman's voice from inside the house whispering, "He's both of us now." If the bones were Eli's, it meant the Thomason bloodline didn't vanish in time it was buried, hidden by the very hands that brought it into being. But what made the discovery unbearable wasn't just the incest or the secrecy. It was the possibility that the child in that coffin wasn't Eli at all, because a week after the coffin was unearthed, another file surfaced from a neighboring county, a school registry from 1937, Enlisted among the first-grade students, clear as day was the name Eli J. Thomason, age 8. The record from 1937 should have been impossible. If the child buried beneath the Thomason house was Eli, he couldn't have been sitting in a classroom 8 years later, writing his name in cursive beside 20 other children. Yet there it was, written in black ink, checked by a teacher's careful hand. When questioned, surviving alumni from that year swore they remembered him a quiet boy with a strange way of watching people, as if he were studying their movements, memorizing them. He was smaller than the other children, they said, pale, always wearing long sleeves, even in summer. One woman, interviewed decades later, said she remembered a moment that never left her. The teacher had asked the class to draw their families. Most of the children sketched smiling faces, stick figures beneath bright suns. But Eli's drawing showed 3 people, a woman, a man, and a child standing between them. The woman had no face. The man's hands were too large. And the child's head was drawn twice, one facing the front, one turned backward. After 1938, Eli's name vanished again from all records. No death certificate, no relocation forms, no mention in census data. It was as if he dissolved. But something remained, stories whispered in the hollers of southeastern Kentucky, about a boy who lived alone in the woods, who talked to himself in 2 different voices. Hunters claimed they saw lights flickering in the ruins of the Thomason property long after it was abandoned. One said he heard a child crying there, but the crying didn't sound right. It echoed, like it came from inside the walls. In 1952, a census taker recorded a hermit living in an unmarked cabin 5 miles from the old Thomason place. The man gave his name as Eli Jacobson, his age 23. The census taker noted that the man looked closer to 40, his face prematurely aged, but his eyes clear and too knowing. Locals avoided him. Children dared each other to leave tokens at his porch, a toy, a coin, sometimes a scrap of bread. The gifts always disappeared overnight. When the cabin burned down in 1958, the authorities found no remains. Only a single charred object survived the fire, a small wooden horse, initials E.T., scorched but still legible, and that's when the legend of the brother, son, began to take shape, a ghost story born from something too human to face. In the years that followed the fire, the story of the Thomason child became something passed down in hushed tones, half superstition, half warning. Parents told it to keep their children from wandering too far into the woods. But the older folks, the ones who'd lived through it, spoke differently. They said the fire didn't end anything. It was meant to, but it failed. In 1964, a new family bought a piece of the old Thomason land, the Barlows, a couple from Ohio looking for quiet and cheap acreage. They built a small ranch home where the barn once stood, unaware of the history beneath their feet. Within a month, they began reporting strange things, tools vanishing, windows found open in the night, the sound of footsteps in the attic, even though the house had no access up there. The husband, Frank Barlow, started keeping a shotgun by the door. His wife said she'd wake to see their young son standing in the hallway, whispering to someone she couldn't see. When she asked him who he was talking to, the boy said, "My friend Eli. He says I'm lucky he didn't get to stay." At first, the Barlows dismissed it as childhood imagination, until one morning their son came downstairs holding a wooden toy horse, the same kind that had been unearthed decades earlier. The initials were gone, but a faint carving remained, a crude mark like a cross turned sideways. The boy said Eli gave it to him so he'd remember. By that fall, the family fled the property. Their son stopped speaking for almost a year. When he finally did, the first thing he said was, "He's looking for his mother." In 1981, the land was surveyed again for development, and during the soil inspection, workers hit something metallic beneath the clay. A box rusted, locked, and sealed tight. Inside were 2 things: a woman's wedding ring, inscribed J.T. to C.T. 1928, and a page torn from a diary. The writing was faint, but the last line was still legible. It said, "If he has Jacob's eyes and my blood, what does that make him? What does that make me?" And in the corner of the page, a child's handwriting had scrawled one sentence beneath it, as if replying from another time, "It makes us the same." By the time the diary page reached the county museum, the Thomason story had crossed from rumor into something else, a stain on the map. Reporters came and went, each one chasing a different version. Some called it a haunting, others a forgotten crime. But none of them could explain how a child with no traceable father, buried once, appeared again and again across the decades like a name refusing to die. In 1993, a genealogist named Dr. Lorraine Finch took on the case. She specialized in Appalachian family lines, and she believed the Thomason story was less about ghosts and more about blood. She dug through census data, church registries, even DNA samples from descendants of nearby families. What she found made her stop her work entirely. Every family within 10 miles of the old Thomason land shared one common genetic marker, an anomaly passed down from a single male ancestor dating back to the early 1900s. It wasn't unusual enough to prove incest, but it was rare, and in every living sample, the marker matched one person from a 1952 medical record, Eli Jacobson. Dr. Finch became obsessed. She started seeing patterns: children born to young mothers, missing fathers, families that moved away and changed their names. She began to think the Thomason line never ended. It scattered, diluted itself into the blood of the living. She even claimed to have received a letter, unsigned, postmarked from Laurel County. Inside was only a photo of the wooden horse and a note that read, "He still remembers you." A year later, Dr. Finch vanished. Her car was found abandoned off Highway 25, doors unlocked, headlights still on. In the passenger seat, a single page from her research journal. It read, "He isn't a ghost, he's inheritance." After that, no one touched the case again. The land was sold to the state, fenced off, and left to the weeds. But if you drive that stretch of road at night, you can still see a shape in the field, small, still, like a child waiting to be found. And every few years someone finds another trace, a toy, a carving, a child's footprint too deep to belong to anything living. They say Kentucky forgets nothing. The hills hold sound the way graves hold breath tightly, unwilling to let go. Locals still warn travelers who stop near the old Thomason tract not to linger after dark. They say if you listen closely, you'll hear two voices whispering just beyond the tree line. One low and trembling like a man in prayer, the other softer, a woman's voice, humming a lullaby that never finishes. In 2009, a team of amateur historians from Lexington filmed a short documentary on the property. What they captured was supposed to be mundane, overgrown foundations, bits of broken pottery, an unmarked well. But in the last 5 minutes of their footage, the camera catches something impossible. A figure standing behind them, blurred but child-sized, holding what appears to be a wooden toy. The team didn't notice it until they reviewed the tape. When they returned to the site a week later, the well was filled in, sealed. The video never aired. One of the filmmakers, a man named Carter, uploaded a few stills to an online forum. He captioned them, "There was someone else there." Within days, the post was removed. His account was deleted, but before it vanished, several users commented on one strange detail reflected in the camera lens. In the moment the figure appeared was another face, close to Carter's shoulder. A man's face, smiling. The Thomason curse, if you want to call it that, has nothing to do with ghosts or possessions. It's about repetition, the way sin breeds in silence, the way shame takes root and grows until it looks like family. A child becomes his own uncle, a mother becomes her own sister. Time folds over itself, and blood rewrites the story in every generation, too afraid to tell it straight. If you're still watching, you're already braver than most. Tell us in the comments, what would you have done if this was your bloodline? Would you have buried the truth like they did, or let it keep breathing? Because maybe that's what Eli Thomason was all along, not a ghost, not a curse, but the living proof that some families don't die out. They just start over again and again, until someone finally looks back and says his name out loud, and if you ever do it quietly, because in Kentucky 1929 never really ended, it just changed its name.